Morning, Sunday school. Good morning to you all. So glad to have another Sunday morning with you. I'm just doing my welcome message here. We are talking about Elijah, the prophet of courage. Elijah, prophet of courage. And thank you for bearing with me. It was my teaching Sunday in my church class. And so thank y'all for hopping on. My class was good. We just went over by a couple of minutes and I wanted to get them done and wrapped up so I can be fully present over here. I teach every other Sunday at my church, so I'm grateful to be able to rotate. But on my Sundays, I'm just trying to be faithful. I'm just trying to be faithful. So we started 8:45 and I try to be here for 9:45 with us. Good morning, Asa Sams. Good morning. Okay, I'm just making our message here. All right. There we go. Happy Palm Sunday to you all. I cannot believe this year is moving like it is, but happy Palm Sunday. And you can probably tell I'm not home today. I am at Mom's house. I'm still in Kansas City. So I'm leaving here later this evening and just happy to be here. So good morning. We'll go ahead and we'll get started. We do have quite a packed lesson. Feel free to share this video in your personal digital spaces, wherever you may have friends who could be blessed by our Sunday school lesson on today. As we're talking about courage, let's go ahead and pray. Father, thank you for this day, this time, this space, this opportunity. Thank you for just another day, for new mercies, a fresh morning. You allowed us to lay down last night and we're up this morning with the portion of health and strength. And we want to use that health and strength in a way that brings glory and honor to you. God, I pray that you'll bless us today as we go into your word, as we dive into what it means to be courageous individuals for you, operating in the strength, not that's our own, but one that is so confident in who you are, that you go before us and that you stand before us and that you speak for and through us. God, open up your word in new ways to us and allow us to see you as we have not before, but most of all, give us the opportunity to apply this word in the places that we live, work, and serve. Now, God, I pray that you'll bless every individual who's present with us in our class today, and even those who will catch the replay. You know every individual and what we stand in the need of. And today I'll pray that you'll be just who you are. And that's the great God who can do absolutely anything. We love you and we give you glory. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. We are in 1 Kings. I got to go to the top of my notes here. 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 5 through 18. Lesson title, Elijah, prophet of courage. And our Bible truth is Elijah defends his prophecy of the drought to wicked King Ahab. Our memory verse is verse 18. And by the end of the lesson, we will compare Elijah's response to speaking to Ahab to that of Obadiah's response to the report, bringing back the report to Ahab. Gain a sense of Obadiah's concerns when reporting Elijah's message to Ahab, and act in boldness when speaking the word of God. All right, I'm going to start by asking you, what is your definition of courage or being courageous? What is your definition? What does that look like to be courageous? And good morning, so many of you are on. Thank you for that. What is your definition of being courageous? As I reflected on the lesson, I said that being courageous is making bold moves even when you are a bit fearful. Sister Tracy says it's stepping out on faith. Absolutely. I just noted that it doesn't even mean that you aren't a little fearful or concerned, but it's doing right even when there are consequences. Yes, Denise, stepping out against all odds. Absolutely. I agree with that. I also said that it's doing it and against all odds is the same way of saying doing it even when there may be opposition. We're not always guaranteed that there will not be opposition. So yes, Sister Francis Spencer, being able to take bold steps even when it's not popular, bold steps even when others are not necessarily excited about what you're doing or what you have to say. And sometimes courage for me isn't even all about the other person. Sometimes courage for me is even being willing to push past my own fears or my own insecurities or my own y'all know me. I like to know how things are going to work out and what are all the pieces of the plan. But yes, it is doing it, Sister Tracy, no matter what. It is truly eliminating excuses. It's bravery, Sister Catherine, absolutely. So we're going to look at a man who demonstrated bravery and doing things against all odds in this lesson as we look at Elijah this morning. Now we're in the book of First Kings. And the book of First Kings, I love Old Testament. I love history. And as we look at even First Kings, the story beginning with Solomon, going through the division of the kingdoms, this whole book is filled with stories of leadership, some good leadership, a whole lot of bad leadership. But a lot of the book is really about crisis management because as we discussed last week, remember when Josiah found the scrolls, they found the book of Deuteronomy. And we highlighted the fact that Deuteronomy was, here's the Cliff Notes versions. You do what's right. You love God. You honor God. You serve him. And God will love you back and he will be present for you. But if you do the things that don't please God, if you go after idol gods, if you worship things and put them before God, then he in turn will give you what you think you want. And that is a space that leaves his people oftentimes unprotected and without his responsibility to their mess. God was never obligated to the things that came on them as a result of their worship of idols and their giving their love and attention in other spaces. And so as we look at this week's lesson, we've got to keep that in mind, that much of the crisis that came on the land was as a result of bad choices. But I think crisis is very interesting because in as much as this book is about crisis management, crisis is very interesting, right? Because they are very tough. But at the same time, I don't think we always know it. In fact, we don't. We don't typically have a space of knowing everything that we will know on the backside of a crisis. But generally, when we come out, we can look back on crisis and we can find and identify things that we learn about ourselves. And we can absolutely find so much that we learn about God, like our muscle, our faith muscle, and even our courage. It's not developed in spaces where we're sitting in complete comfort, but it is developed in those times when we have no other choice but to trust God and to watch how he is going to move. So in as much as, good morning, Brother Christopher, in as much as they are in a lot of crisis in First Kings, it's also a space where leaders emerge, and there is such a space where we see the hand of God. And that's where our lesson really takes us today. We're looking, I need to read for you, I guess, this entire passage. So I'll begin at verse 5. And Ahab said unto Obadiah, go into the land unto all the fountains of water, and to all the brooks, peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we lose not all the beasts. So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. And as Obadiah was in the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and fell on his face and said, art thou my Lord Elijah? And he answered him, I am. Go and tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, what have I sinned, that thou wouldest deliver thy servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me? As the Lord thy God liveth, there is no nation or kingdom whither my Lord hath not seek me. And when he said he is not here, he took an oath of the kingdom and the nation, and they found thee not. And now thou sayest, go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And it shall come to pass, as soon as I am gone from thee, that the Spirit of the Lord shall carry thee whither I know not. And so when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find thee, he will slay me. But thy servant fear the Lord from thy youth. Was it not told to my Lord what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord, and how I hid 100 men in the Lord's prophets by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now thou sayest, go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he slay me. And Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself unto him today. And Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. And it came to pass, when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, art thou he that troubleth Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, in that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Baalim. That is our entire passage reading. And as we're going into this, we see clearly that there is a king. Let's talk about the king for just a bit. And you can begin to tell me, what did you learn about Ahab? Who is he? Tell me what you learned about him in your study. Where did he rule? How long did he rule? As we look at this, we've got a crisis of leadership. It is very clear here that this particular leader, who is Ahab, he begins to reign. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 29 is where we learn of Ahab, I believe it is. And he is an evil king. And that's always important for you to know when you go through Old Testament. You need to identify the spirit of the king, because leadership always bears a direct reflection to what is going on. When the leaders honor God, God's people are blessed. But when the leaders are not honoring God, when their focus is not on God, when they're worshiping other things, God leaves them and leaves them over to their passion. And here, this is an evil king who's reigned over northern Israel, the northern kingdom, all of Israel being one at one point in time, and then they split. The northern tribes become these 10 that go north, and then the southern tribes, that is Judah, that is the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, they go south. And so Ahab is the ruler of Israel. That is the northern kingdom. He rules, according to 1 Kings 17:29, he rules for 22 years. Let me just say, 22 years is a long time to sit under evil leadership. 22 years is a long time to sit under a bad leader. It's a long time if you've got a bad manager at work. 4 years was a long time in this country with a leader that was very challenging. 22 years is a long time. He's the 7th king of the north. Sister Corlette Francis Spencer tells us, thank you for that. The 7th king of the north, who ruled for 22 years. And he did more evil. This stood out to me. First Kings, I keep wanting to say second. 1 Kings 17:30 tells us that he did more evil than any king ever before him. That is just telling us how terrible this individual was. But he wasn't bad all by himself. I'm waiting by now for somebody to tell me, who was he married to? Because who you marry, who you're partnered with. I don't have a husband yet, but who you marry matters, because what you produce together will be a direct result of those two individuals who have come together. And the work that is happening in the northern kingdom, the things that are going on, are a direct result of the two people who have gotten together. And yes, I see you, Asa Sims, Sister Corlette. He is married to the infamous bad girl of the Bible, Jezebel. And as if that were not enough, if it were not enough that he followed the sins of Jeroboam, he marries a woman who was given to idol worship. And he made alliance with her. It wasn't just a love pact, but he made an alliance with her. She was a worshiper of Baal. And she had enough influence that he became a strong worshiper of Baal. They even built temples and monuments to the Baal in the capital city. And so very important to keep in mind that all of this permeates now throughout the land. So here we are in verse 5, this king who is dealing with the crisis has a servant, and that servant is Obadiah. And he asked Obadiah, note this, Obadiah is not the prophet Obadiah, but this is the servant in the king's house who was in charge of the king's household. This was important for me. I kind of saw this as a learning in here. Obadiah is a servant of God. We know that from verse 12. His name actually means worshiper of God. So he is one who worships the true and living God, but he works for, he is a chief servant for a very evil king. That just tells me that you and I, as people of God, we may run into managers, supervisors, people in our workplace that we report to who don't share our values. And that does not change who we are and the fact that we serve and we worship God, because this man was faithful to God, but he also had a very respected position in the house of the king. He is a member of the faith community, and that is the one thing that he will have in common with Elijah here in just a few moments. But for now, the king is concerned. He's got a crisis, and the crisis, go ahead and tell me what the crisis is in the land. There's a crisis now that's been in play for more than 3 years. What is a crisis? A crisis is a difficult time. It is an unpredictable time. It is a set of situations or circumstances, a set of situations or circumstances that we don't have control of. We don't know where it's going. We don't know how long it's going to last. And on some level, it is causing detriment. And yes, Sister Catherine, and yes, Sister Jeanette, he is going through a drought. A drought means that there is no water. But 3 years into a drought, it isn't just the water that is being impacted, because go ahead and tell me all of the things that we depend on water for. Why do we need water? And I know that there are some very practical answers, but I don't always think that let me put it this way, we can take water for granted. Because we live, most of us, I don't know where viewers are today, but most of us are in a country where water is not at issue. But I can tell you that 5 weeks ago tomorrow, we had a, what do they call it, Snowvid-19 in Texas. And in the city of Dallas, we were struggling for power and water. And this went on for long periods of time. And so in our space, I know individuals who did not have water for several days. And so sometimes, yes, Sister Brenda, nearly everything depends on water. And we don't always think about that until we don't have a thing that we need. No water, but he wasn't concerned about the people in the water. He was concerned about his horses and his mules. Sister Linda, I'm going to agree with you in part on that. He does not overly care about the people. He is concerned about the animals, but he's concerned about everything, because the water does mean no water for the people, no water for cooking, no water for teeth brushing, no water for bathing, no water for the crops, no water for the animals. And ultimately, I don't even believe that he's concerned about the animals. He's not concerned about the animals. He's not concerned about the people. In my opinion, his ultimate concern is the economy. And if you can't keep the animals, you can't keep the people. That has to do with the food supply. It has to do with people's ability to work. It has to do with the entire sustainability of the land that he is over. And so, yes, no food for the animals, no crops, no water, no humans and the humans. And with the water, yes, we need water as an important part of life. And even with the animals disappearing, let's play that out for just a moment. Why do we need animals? Yes, he was concerned about the animals, but that's why I'm telling you, he didn't just love horses and mules. That's not what this is. But let's talk about what we use crop and livestock for. Oh, Sister Brenda, what a powerful thought that the earth is 3/4 water. Absolutely. And yet there was a drought in this area, 3/4 water, but they don't have what they need to sustain the land and the people and the herds. And when I looked at what are animals used for? A whole lot more than we think. Yes, animals have to do with food supply, but animals also have to do with, in those times, the hides for clothing and all sorts of things, transportation, you name it. So it wasn't just his love of the animals, but his entire economic structure was at issue. And so he goes now, he wants the servant to help find grass so that they can save the animals. Let's talk about how we even got here. How does this drought even take place? Well, that's going to become important, because that is why this setup actually happens. 3 years prior, there is a prophet, and because they've been given to the Baal worship, they've not loved and served the true and living God, God has to send judgment or punishment to them. And that's what we know from Deuteronomy, that there is judgment. There's a reckoning with not serving God. There is a reckoning with choosing things over God. And so they were in their space of having to deal with their own judgment. And in this case, the prophet Elijah was the one who's used, a prophet from Tishbe. His name means Yahweh is God. He was one who was a mouthpiece for God. We're talking about prophets in this lesson series. And so he is one who is being used as a mouthpiece for God. Now, Elijah was a regular guy. He had regular guy issues, but God used him in great ways. And he stood and he was a man of courage. And in this lesson, you're going to hear me identify, because that's what we're talking about is courage. You're going to hear me identify courage by the prophet, but there are other people inside the story where we can learn. We've got to be able to identify all of the courage and lack of courage, because sometimes we learn our behaviors by what we don't see modeled in as much as what we see being proactively displayed. And so Elijah has to be a courageous man when he speaks truth to power in the midst of evil. He takes a stand for God, and he speaks saying to the king that there will be no rain and there would be no dew, not even the little bit of dew in the morning. Nothing is going to sustain this area in terms of water except at his word. Again, he's spoken courageously to power, but we also talked about the fact that courage is sometimes on display, even when it means that you may lose. It may hurt or harm you. And so when I look at even his prophetic word on there will be no rain, this doesn't mean that Elijah's got his own private stash of rainwater at home and that God has a situation where he's not gonna. No, he too lives in this area. So no rain meant no rain for everyone. And yet this does not hold Elijah back in any way from standing in that place of courage to speak to the king. Now, what does that mean? It means that we're 3 years into what this prophet said would happen. There's no rain, there's no dew, except at my word. And so now Elijah is considered, as the young adults say, he's a whole problem. The king views Elijah as the issue, as the problem for their current disaster. And so as he is now, his anger has become more and more. The king realizes that he's not able to stand against the plan and the power of God. And so God sends Elijah into a place of hiding after this prophetic word. Now, interesting for me, I don't typically think of someone who's very courageous as being one who is running to hide. But what we're going to see here is that his courage was not necessarily in what we think we see. His courage was in his ability to follow and do just what God said do, even when all these crazy pieces did not seem to make sense. And so as they are now, Obadiah, and Ahab are now in search of water, and they're in search of grass for the herds, leaving, have a good day, Sister Linda, in your service. Have a good day. All right, so they're now looking for grass. And in verse 7, as Obadiah goes his way, he runs directly into Elijah, and immediately he knows who Elijah is. Now, I'm curious because I don't know if you look exactly the same as you did 3 years ago. Maybe you've had haircut, or weight loss, I don't know. But a lot of us 3 years, you may look a little bit differently than you did 3 years ago. And even if you don't look differently than you did 3 years ago, I'll speak personally. I don't know how y'all did in the pandemic, but we were, March, we were just kind of getting started. But by late April, early to mid-May, having been to the hair salon like you're used to going, by the end of April, I had run nails as long as I could do the nails. I've still not been to the nail salon. And so there are things that without our normal ability to maintain them, and that includes our own hygiene, our own look, I almost figured that him seeing Elijah wasn't necessarily about a physical appearance. I even saw a story last week about a little boy. They were talking about his virtual schooling, but they showed him a year ago, and he had the perfect little, haircut. He's blonde haired little kid, cute kid, short haircut. But this time this year, he's got a ponytail because he's not been able to go get his regular haircut. So I would imagine that there were some regular things about him that may not have been the same, but there was still something about him that caused Obadiah to know who he was. Sister Dora says that God sustained him during the famine and that obedience was the key. Absolutely. Obadiah was obedient. Yes, Sister Dora. Okay, we're coming right there. Obadiah recognizes Elijah. And remember, we called out the fact that Obadiah is a man of faith. I'm sure he knew his brother from the faith community. And if nothing else, he knew him by the Spirit of God. And he just confirms, is that you, Elijah? And Elijah says, yes, it's me. Behold, it's me. Go tell the king that Elijah is here. Now, he's put Obadiah into an interesting spot. He wants him to take a courageous move to go and tell the king that he's found Elijah. Now, was this a courageous assignment or not? Well, in Obadiah's mind, in this moment, everything seems to be happening very quickly. They've been looking for Elijah for 3 years, and suddenly here he is. And now you want me to go quickly and tell the king that, whoa, just a minute. This does not, and sometimes when we are put in the immediacy of a moment, we can't always think and see and feel courageous. And that's where Obadiah is, because Sister Dora Barron is right. He's done something courageous before, because all while Elijah has been gone, prophets have been persecuted. And Obadiah has been a man of faith and a man of courage. He's actually hidden 100 prophets in caves where Jezebel was looking for them. And he says, come here, I'm going to hide you. And while he was in there, this wasn't human trafficking. He actually fed them and made sure that they had provision. But in this moment, that same courage that he's had in other spaces, he doesn't feel that right now. He is trying to figure out how his own involvement is any opportunity that God could be involved in. He's not thinking about any of this. Why? Because he is operating not in courage, but he's operating in a space of fear. He immediately starts to offer up his own fear, his own hesitation, his own excuses. Why would he be fearful? And I'll let you all tell me in the comments, and we've hit on it already. Why would he be fearful though? What reasons did he have to fear? And not only am I going to ask you that, but I'm going to ask you, what excuses do we come up with when we have these opportunities in front of us that seem like moments that we perhaps aren't sure that we want to step into? How do we respond? And I'm not picking on you. I have a decision to make today. And I've already kind of gone through well, if I do it this way, it means this, but I'm not sure because it could mean that. And we do that. And we do that for all sorts of reasons. And sometimes I think our fear is in play. I believe that uncertainty can be in play. But here, Obadiah is not thinking about anything but himself. He is thinking about the fact that he is going to have to take a report to an already angry king. He is fearful of persecution. He is fearful of death. I said it this way in Markup Monday, and we laughed in my class this morning. You are trying to get me killed, not killed, Killt. You are trying to get me killed is what he is saying to Elijah. Our excuse is, what will they think of me, Sister Denise says. Fear of the boss or the king, Brother Reginald says. Sometimes we feel inadequate, Sister Dora says, but God helps us to feel more adequate. God helps us to build our courage. And in the case of poor Obadiah here, yes, Brother Reginald is right that he fears the boss. He fears the leadership. Why? Because the king, angry can make you crazy. And that's what's happened here. Now, I'm going to talk about these actually in reverse order, because we hit on the fact that the king has a very interesting bad girl of the Bible wife. And because of this prophecy, because of this Elijah's head, Elijah is a fugitive, and he's been basically accused of the crime, or he's the cause of the crisis in the land, quite frankly, because she couldn't find him. Because you go out there and you find him, do whatever it takes to find him. She's essentially running the king. You go bring him, go get him. I want him. And because she can't find him, every prophet in the land has to take it for Elijah if she gets her hands on him. And so that's why Obadiah is trying to save as many as he can, because every prophet is having to bear the sin or the accusation of Elijah. Have y'all ever been one of the kids who got in trouble with the group? The whole group got in trouble because of one person. Yeah, some of us remember that. And that's what's happened with these prophets. And so the king has been sending into every area, and he makes them look for Elijah. And when they can't find him, he makes that leader swear an oath. We've looked for him. We do not see him here. And what they are most frustrated with is that they are not able to stand against these God moves that Elijah is making, that their gods, their idols, their Baals don't empower them to stand against the plan of the Almighty God. So as a result, the king is angry and he is frustrated. And so Obadiah knows that. So that's his thing. You're trying to send me in front of an angry and frustrated king, and you're asking too much of me. And so no, Obadiah doesn't feel courageous right now. Elijah even had to snap out of his depression once. Okay, yes, Sister Dora, you're right. Obadiah, Cato, is between a rock and a hard place. I absolutely agree. And so in between this rock and a hard place, he starts to make his case. He's offering all the reasons why this is not a good idea for me. What he's explaining is what I just shared with you. We have been in the worst game of hide and go seek that you have ever seen. We've looked everywhere for you. And every time we look for you, we don't find you. So now my concern is, I see you here, but you're asking me to leave this space and just kind of trust that you're going to be here when I get back. Well, no, I can't really do that. And the reason I can't do that is because every time we have tried to look for you, God sends you somewhere. And how does he even know? He acknowledges that God's hand is on Elijah. He knows that God is moving him. He makes these God moves. So where is it that Elijah has been? Does anybody know? Go ahead and share with me. Where are the places? All the places you will go is what Dr. Sue said. So where has Elijah been? Let's go back. I should have warned you, this Sunday school lesson is like those movies where you're present, but then you got to go back and see what happened in the past that gets you right back to the present. So what he's saying is you keep disappearing. You're doing these disappearing acts. And so I'm afraid now that you're going to do that as soon as I leave you here, God is going to send you somewhere else. Well, if you go back to chapter 17, just after Elijah prophesied that there would be a drought, the Lord, in verse 3 of chapter 17, tells him to get up and go east and to hide by the brook Cherith. And he stood out there he was there for quite a while, and he was fed every day by ravens. He has been hidden, I see, under a juniper tree. He was even hidden, in Zarephath. After the brook dries up, he's hidden there. The brook dries up because of the drought. And then he's sent to Zarephath, and there's going to be a widow woman there, and she's going to sustain you. So there are all these movements that he keeps making, and no one can find him. I got to talk about courage right here again. Now I got to talk about Elijah, who has prophesied difficult things, courageously spoke truth to power. But it also takes courage to make moves when you don't know when, where, or what. And I know that sometimes God moves us, and y'all know I confess to this often, that I am the person who likes to know the plan. God, where are we going, and what are we doing, and how's it going to work out, and what happens if Elijah doesn't get a chance to analyze this? He has to move obediently. I think Sister Dora told us that earlier, that this was about his obedience. And that's a note for us, that courage is sometimes just in our obedience when we don't know how all of the pieces work together in the plan. And here's another courage note, that as God directed him, every time he moved Elijah where he guided him, he always provided for him. So as we're thinking about what it takes to build up that courage muscle in our own lives, there's a courage that goes along with trusting God's plan and trusting that I got you. Wherever God moves you, he's got you in that plan, and he's going to provide for you. Let me keep moving. So Obadiah's argument is not only that you're trying to get me killed, but why would you try to get me killed when I've been faithful? I didn't just start being faithful. I didn't get faithful last week because, we're going through a difficult time. And when we go through difficult times, people run to God. It happens. Remember September 11th, 9/11. When 9/11 happened, you could not get in churches 4 months because people ran to God because of crisis. And Obadiah said, I'm not that guy. I didn't just run because there's a crisis here, but I have literally been faithful. And here's where he starts, as the young people say providing receipts. His receipts were those prophets that we talked about, where he's hidden them and he's tried to take care of God's men. And so now, why would you allow me to go into a space that is dangerous for me when I have been faithful? Here's another courage note. Let's talk about the courage of Obadiah again. He doesn't have the courage or the strength in his own courage that he's able to apply going forward. He's had the courage to hide prophets, but now he lacks the courage to move in another way that God could possibly move him. This is an open space for his fear to play in. And I just want to speak to that for a moment, because fear so often stops us from making the moves we need to make, because again, we just don't understand what's taking place. And fear will always be an enemy to courage. In every space, fear is an enemy to courage. And so never allow our own fear, our own factors of intimidation, be the thing that prevents us from moving in the ways that God wants us to move. In verse 15, there are promises that begin to be made here. And Elijah makes a promise, and he's going to go meet Ahab. But he has to assure Obadiah. He wants to give assurances. And we know what assurances are. When you make a promise, I will do. There are sometimes in fact, many times we make moves based on assurances. That's what contracts are. When we assure, each party is assuring the other of what they're going to do. So Elijah first has to give an assurance to Obadiah. And his assurance is based on the commonality that they have. That is their faith. He's like saying, I promise, under the God that we serve, under the thing that we have in common, what I promise you is I am going to show up. I'm not going to disappear on you. I'm not going to ditch you. I'm not going to run out on you. I am going to show up. Now, I ask myself, okay, how did we get here? Why would a man who has essentially no power, who's been on the run, why would he suddenly be willing to show himself? Well, it's not suddenly. You got to go back to the beginning of the chapter, and in verses 1 and 2, you'll see that the Lord, this has been about God moves the entire time for Elijah. And the Lord told him, I now moved you from the brook. You moved to the widow's house. Now go show yourself to the king. Everything happens in the timing of God. Evangelist Allen says, sometimes you agree. Sometimes we're looking for the why before we move. And sometimes God reveals the why as we're moving, or even after we've moved. Absolutely. There are things sometimes that make no sense at all. Why am I doing the thing this way? Why is God having me to do it that way? And in the end, we look back on it. And that's why we use the phrase that hindsight is what? 2020, because on the backside, that's when we say, God, I see now. You knew all along what was going on. You knew how this would work out. God, I wanted this thing and it felt good in the moment and it seemed like it was the right thing to do, but you didn't allow that to work out. Oh my goodness. A few years later, God, I see why you didn't allow that situation to work, or in that timing, it wasn't time for me to have a thing. So absolutely, fear is an enemy to courage. Absolutely, Cato, for sure. And God has not given us, Maureen White, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, a sound mind. He's given us bold spirits like lions. We don't operate in fear. And let's see, yes, Sister Dora, commitments are important. And so as Elijah makes his commitment, he makes it and he gives it in a way that provides the assurance that puts Obadiah into action. And there are times that we just need assurance and we want to feel more strongly before we take moves. And I'm not even faulting us. I'm one of those people who I just need to feel an assurance. And sometimes you don't know how the assurance is coming. But yes, I do sometimes, even myself, I ask God, I want to know that this is you. And I want to know that I can depend on it. And I want to know that it's going to be okay. And so Obadiah gets that, but it comes through his own willingness to trust the word of his brother in the faith, and that is this prophet. So it's definitely a God plan, because again, Elijah has been moving around, but even in his own crisis, because it has to feel a little bit of anxiety has to be present when Elijah is going to go and meet this king. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know he's going to go in courage, but that doesn't mean that you go without thinking about it. Courage does not mean that my mind is not still thinking, and this could be tricky. But he goes based on the courage that has been built, even as he's moved around. And what he knows is that God is known by his pattern. And all along the way, God has led him, God has provided, and God has never allowed harm to come to him. And I believe that we have to learn to express God in patterns. And what am I trying to say? It's almost an algebra equation that X becomes a thing. And we're talking about a crisis here. Whatever my crisis is, when I apply my faith, my prayer, my belief in that God is for me, I always get these results. We've got to learn to know God by his pattern. And so no matter what my crisis is, whether it is a crisis of a relationship, when I apply the same formula, I get God results. If it's a crisis in my finances, that's my X. That is in that space, but I apply the same formula. And every time I know God by his pattern. And so here's Elijah. He's had some difficult moves. Who goes out by a brook? Birds are going to feed me every day. I don't even like birds. Waynell doesn't like birds. Birds are going to bring me meals every day. A widow? What do you mean a widow? Oh my goodness, people are going to think it's weird. I'm showing up at a widow's house. She doesn't have a man. I'm in her house. She eat her food, take her. None of these things make sense. But when you apply the same formula, you trust God, you obey, you put your faith in God, he always delivers the same result. And so here he is, having to display another level of courage to again go before the king, knowing that God is the master planner. And that's part of the lesson for our own courage muscles, knowing that God is the master planner and that we just need to apply the formula and know that he always gives reliable results. So Ahab, this meeting is set up. Obadiah sets up a meeting between Elijah and with Ahab. It's a face-to-face meeting, and he is assured that it's going to take place. He's got courage, and Elijah knows that he's going back into hostile territory. He knows this, but he also knows that he goes in the strength of a God who is guiding him, who provides for him, who has always kept him safe. And so he is obedient and going to this meeting with Ahab. Now, here's what I wanted to know, because he's going back into hostile territory, not just a hostile king, but remember, the king has a notoriously bad girl of the Bible wife. Does anybody know, where's Jezebel at this point? If he's got to go show himself to the king, the queen is somewhere. Where is the queen? If I look at your comments, where is the queen? The king's entourage didn't have flags and bubbles. They had armor, but Elijah stood, Sister Deborah, absolutely going into, that's courage to go stand before this very visually scary situation. And sometimes that's what makes us nervous. It's the way things appear. But we've got to remember, the formula is not based on how things appear. The formula it's a static formula. And those things, that is our faith. That's where we build courage. It's based on not what we feel, not what we see, but courage is based on what we know, and what we know not about our own selves, but what we know about those plugins that directly relate to the performance of our God. God increases our faith by the word of God. Yes, Sister Dora, for sure. God gives the best results, Sister Maureen, and not only the best results, they are consistent results. They are consistently the best results. All right, so let's see here. We choose Christ over crisis. I love that, Sister Catherine. And in this moment, as Elijah chooses Christ over the crisis, as he shows himself to Ahab, I thought this was interesting. Jezebel, according to chapter 18, verses 45, if you read into chapter 19, she out of town. Like, God sets up this entire thing at a time when she, the driver of all of this, the person who probably had the most animosity against Elijah, she wasn't even in town. She's in Jezreel. So she's not even in that space. So I just looked at how God, he knows what he's doing. Again, I love to know the plan, and I know you do too, but look at this. God allows even the meeting of Obadiah, while he's looking for grass, God allows these two men of faith to meet each other. That's no accident. That's God's providence. And now here, when this next meeting is set up, God even orchestrates these meetings. Two men of faith meet. Now the next meeting is set up, and where there's a third player in here that I should be concerned about, God doesn't even allow her to be in town. So God knows what he's doing, and he sets up things at just the right time. Doesn't mean that the meeting is easy. Verses 17 and 18, our final verses tell us that, because when they do meet each other, Ahab sees Elijah, Elijah sees Ahab, and the first thing that starts is accusations and finger pointing, because Ahab says to Elijah, are you the one that's troubling Israel? Are you the one that's causing all this trouble? And Elijah answers back, I haven't caused any trouble. I'm not doing anything. You talking about that no rain? No, I didn't do that. You did that. You did that through your own choices. You did that. And remember, I told you last week that they don't just call out a bad behavior. When you call out bad behavior, you give an example of a time when that behavior was on display. So he's saying, you caused the trouble of Israel, and you did that when you forsook the commandments of God and you followed after the Baals. You did two things. You did, just like in last week's lesson, you disregarded God's commandments. That's number one. And not only that, you didn't just not pay attention. You put something else in God's place, and you chose to follow after that. So what he's saying is, God, back to the scroll in Deuteronomy, you love God, you serve God, you make him first, he will bless you. You follow after other things, you choose the Baals, you follow after the idols, you forsake God's commandments, and he's going to give you exactly what you think you want. And that's the final thing I want to talk about, is that when we don't keep our priorities straight, there are things sometimes that our flesh is given to, and we think that's the thing that feels good in the moment. We want that thing. God will turn you over, and he will let you have exactly what you think you want. But when that thing comes and it doesn't feel good, drought, and it comes and you can't figure out how you're going to get out of it, not enough, lack, shortage, crisis. Now you're asking, how's that working out for you? That's not working out too good. So what you will know, and I go back to my urban vernacular, I know I keep defaulting to that because it's just so appropriate. That ain't it, sis. The Baals, the idols, you think that's what you want, but that ain't it. That ain't it, sis. That's not what you want. And so this lesson really is not only about courage, but it brings us back to focusing on the fact that we should follow after God, that when we find ourselves in spaces where we are given to other things, he will allow us there, but we get what we get as a result. And that's what Elijah explains to Ahab, that this isn't about me. This is all about you. I am not going to take responsibility for this. What you're going to do in this moment is you've got to own your choices. You will own your behavior, and you own the results of that comes out of this. This entire lesson, we don't get to go into it today, but this becomes the setup for the showdown at Mount Carmel. You remember the story where Elijah, the prophets of Baal, whose God will show up, whose God will respond by fire. That's what this is. And this is, we don't get to talk about it today, but it's an amazing story where we see the power of God continually on display. But for now, you can begin to tell me other big lessons that you got on courage. I'm going to read to you my key learnings, and I'm going to get into service. The first thing for me is that God uses courageous people during difficult times. And I think that this pandemic has been an excellent display of that, even in our own crisis in our nation. So much courage has been present. And so many of you have found ways to be present for family, present in your faith communities, stepping out in new ways. God, I never saw you using me like that. I never saw you doing things like that. And I even continue to think about the ways that God has allowed me to serve in this space. There are some things, like right now, to be honest with you, I think I'm becoming more, as schedules are getting back to normal, I think I'm becoming more aware of sometimes courage is you moving in moments where, I'm going to say it this way, like things that I started to expand in. I wanted to be present. God, help me. How do we work through this crisis together? Your kingdom can't suffer. And so things that I did, children's lessons and kids packs. That wasn't something that I was doing, but now in the midst of kind of a schedule getting back to normal, I'm like, oh. So sometimes courage and those moments will pull you into things, but God uses people in difficult times. He's used so many of you in even this difficult time to be a part of his plan and be part of helping others to get through crisis. And you'll find that God will use people even in your time of crisis, when you've gone through, you can go back now, and it may not even be somebody that you're friends with forever, but God uses people in crisis. Anxiety shows up when we don't understand and when we perhaps don't agree with what's going on. And that was what happened with Obadiah. I call that kind of a little anxiety attack, that he just got a little worked up because, hey, I didn't get time to think about this. I didn't get time to plan on it. But God is in control. He is the master planner. And we have to remember that even in the moments that cause us to be a little bit anxious. Courage is not a display of our own strength, but rather it's a display of our trust in God. And so that's that part where I talk about, you may be a little fearful. You may not know how the pieces are going to work together, but you trust that God is not going to send you out and not provide for you in those spaces. We build our courage through the pattern of the faithfulness of our God. Again, knowing that he, in that formula, every single time, he delivers the best results, and they're always consistent. Remember that God is not just a God of our past victories. Obadiah wanted credit for past performance and past victories, but by his pattern, he wants to give us future victories. He wants to use us in courageous ways. We don't just want the testimonies from 1983 when I had courage back in 19. No, you need some 2021 courage as well. Don't just have courage for past victories. God, also Elijah's challenge of courage was to speak to power. So I challenge you today. I don't know what God is calling you to do in a way that's courageous. I don't know where he's calling you into. And I don't know what it is that is pulling you back from that today. I don't know if there is fear that you're struggling with. I don't know if you're thinking about persecution or rejection or your own capabilities, but I want you to know that you can step into a space of courage. Again, not in your own strength, but knowing that God is on your side. He goes before you. He's your rear guard, and he is all around you. So step into your space today. While I'm reading some other comments, 136 of you are in class today. Go ahead and click that thumbs up like button. Go ahead and click that for me and let me know that this was a good lesson for us today. Sister Shay says, I like that you said consistent results, because we can see when we were talking about Joshua a couple weeks ago, how the same formula was applied. Absolutely. Faith and obedience every single time. It is a formula for sure. Absolutely. I'm laughing at you, Sister Deborah. Sister Joy says our choices, bad choices, reap God's consequences, and I don't get to choose. Right. You don't get to choose the consequences for sure. Absolutely. You know, hey, which one of these would you like? You didn't follow the rules, but would you like this one? No, you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit. That's what my nieces and nephews used to say growing up. All right. Sister Deborah says you like the showdown at Mount Carmel. Obadiah and Joseph both were governors who had courage. Yes, they were. And Sister Allen, Evangelist Allen, says the pandemic has led many people to overcome fears, to do ministry in ways that are new to them. Absolutely. So yes, I'll end with that, because I also did that in my other video, to say thank you. Thank you to those of you who have found a way to hear God and be open and meet people in different spaces. Because even in a time of crisis, like we have experienced, what has been so important is that God's kingdom doesn't suffer and that his people don't feel left behind. So this has been an amazing space, and I'm excited because I know that God will continue to open up ways for us to be courageous in our service to him. That's it. I gotta run because the saints at Dominion Word been in church for 15 minutes. I gotta go get in service. If you don't have a place that you're worshiping today, I invite you to join me at the Dominion Word Ministries Church of God in Christ, either here on YouTube or on Facebook. And don't forget to join me tomorrow night for Markup Monday, which begins at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. I'll go live here again on YouTube. Make sure that you're signed up for the free template. I'll be mailing that out later tonight. So probably won't send it out until I get back home tonight. So you got some time. I got to fly home tonight. But I will get that over to you. And that's it. I love everybody so much. I will see you tomorrow night. Have a super rest of your Sunday. Bless. Bye-bye.